Welcome, guys. Okay, we'll just a couple of more minutes. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, I think we should start get going, and we covered a lot of ground that we have today with Professor Mike Gidley and Associate Professor Patrick Blackall. First of all, thank you so much for your time, for taking your time out for educating all the EMCRs within QAAFI, and perhaps UQ, who are looking forward to get into the grant writing, into the research. So to introduce Professor Mike Gidley, we all know he's the director of Center for Nutrition and Food Science, and he's been working on different projects, particularly delicious projects like focusing on smart selections to make consumer preferred foods, the healthy projects focusing on improving nutrition and nutritious quality of the food, and the project that focuses on national pride by identifying and validating food items that are unique to Australia. So really, really valuable contribution there. And his very, very huge experience in grant writing, and that is going to be really valuable for all of us. Then we have Associate Professor Patrick Blackall. He's active in animal research. He has extensive experience in bacteriology and their diversity in different animals, including pigs, poultry, and sheep. His research is ultimately helping meat industry to identify and mitigate diseases. Along with his research duties, he's very active in different roles like editors in different journals, and hold research manager position in poultry cooperative research centers. He's also had success with so many different grant writing processes. So his experience will also be valuable for all of us. So without further ado, let's get back to Professor Mike and ask him to share his experiences on ARC grant writing and also his interaction with industry grant writings. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Amal. Let me see if I can share my screen. It should be working, yeah?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So afternoon, everybody. Great privilege to be here and sort of share some experiences around the grant writing area. Very difficult thing to encapsulate. So I'll just put a few key comments up and then wait for some questions. I think Pat will have a sort of similar, but from a different perspective, set of viewpoints. And then let's have a discussion and let's sort of see if we can help each other navigate the maze, which is the grant application process. So first thing to say, this is not something you do lightly. Grant writing is a very serious business. It is absolutely major undertaking. This is not something you do on a Sunday afternoon. You have to put aside time for it. So be very clear that you want to invest a significant amount of time in getting into this, because if you don't, it will be obvious to the people that are assessing it. So going through, taking the time and effort to plan, write, refine, seek advice, always important. So I'll talk a bit about how you might select the relevant scheme for you, but do that early. Don't wait for the call for grants to come out. Do your homework. Know when your rounds are coming up and be planning for them. So this is, I'm often talking here many months, if not years, before the grant goes in. If you're trying to get a grant together that involves industry collaboration, industry commitment, sometimes that can take 1 or 2 years. So this is not something you rush at, first point. So what type of grants? So there are basically 2 types of grants. There are grants to individuals, which are fellowships, and there are grants to do a piece of work, which are the projects. So obviously, if it's about a fellowship, then the track record of the applicant's critical. If it's about a project, it matters who the applicants are, but the key thing that's going to be, that swings it for you is going to be, can you make an impact with that project? Now, what you mean by impact will be very different depending on what grant scheme you're going for, but the impact of the project will be what basically determines success. So yeah, choose your funding scheme and funding agency and grant scheme carefully. So in the area of agriculture and food, we are blessed in the sense that we do have a large number of potential funding agencies. That also, of course, leads to confusion, and it leads to a bewilderment. What's the right scheme for me? And I think that's part of the discussion we're going to have today. So some of it's around writing the grant, but a lot of it in our space is about understanding where the opportunities may be and planning for them. Probably the biggest thing that people fall down on when writing a grant, they write the grant that they want to read. They don't write the grant that the assessment panel wants to read. It doesn't matter if it reads wonderfully to you. If you don't address the selection criteria, you won't get the grant. Let's talk a little bit about how grants actually work, right? So difficult to generalize, but in general, there will be a call for applications. You will submit your application by a deadline. Generally, then there's a first stage of making sure that you are eligible. So this is where our colleagues within QAAFI, in the Research Grants Administration team, can help you, or within UQ, within the research office. So this is why they ask for grants to be looked at way before the deadline, because we always want to check for compliance. You would be amazed how often funding agencies reject a grant because of a compliance issue that we think is totally trivial. But remember this, grant agencies, they're looking to support the work they want to support, but they're also looking for reasons to not support things. Don't give them that. So the compliance, really important. So that's about the partly the selection criteria, but when you then get into, okay, this is now a compliant grant, this will then go to a panel. Who's on that panel will be very dependent on the scheme that you're talking about. Almost always, though, there'll be a panel. Difficult to say how big it will be, often between 6 and 12 people, that sort of size. And mostly, in most schemes, it will be assigned to a member of that panel, preferably based on their expertise area, but not always. Sometimes it just happens. So members of that panel, what will happen is they will then review. They will seek external advice from external reviewers often, particularly in the ARC, which I'll talk about. And then when those reviews are back, sometimes you get an opportunity to reply to those reviews, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't see the reviews, sometimes you do. But the scheme, the process is rather similar. And then it goes back to the panel. And typically at those panels, there will be the person who's allocated the grant will speak to that grant in the panel discussion. And there will be a discussion around how this application sits with respect to all the other applications that are on the table. Now, you think around success in these sorts of schemes. Well, sometimes that success it will always be limited by the money that's available. So this is why sometimes some schemes will then only allocate essentially all of the money that you ask for, but will therefore only give you a few grants. Some schemes, particularly the ARC, has a habit of saying, well, we want to give grants to 50% more people than there is money for what they're asking for, so we give everyone 2/3 of the money. And not everyone, but there's a sort of sliding scale depending on where you sit. So quite often in ARC, yeah, great, you get the grant, but quite often you get of the order of 2/3 of the money. But of course, they expect all of the deliverables. That's a bit of a strange part of the system. So you're writing for people that you actually don't know, but you do know something about the schemes that they're managing. So there is a little bit of, it's a bit like having your paper accepted or not accepted in a journal. Sometimes it's not particularly logical, and we just have to live with it. It's peer review. So it's the same process that many of you will be familiar with, of sometimes a paper surprisingly easy to get it into a journal, sometimes ridiculously difficult, and it doesn't seem to correlate with what you think of the paper. Grants are no different. It's rather similar to that. You can load the dice a little bit, but there's still an element of good fortune or bad fortune. All right, so ARC, what does ARC, Australian Research Council? So in quotes, it's just from their website what it says. So it's agnostic in terms of the area, as long as it's not medical. I think Pat will talk a little bit about the NH and MRC. So if there's something that's medical, then it is not ARC, it's NH and MRC. And that's a boundary you can't cross. But otherwise, science, social sciences, and humanities. So the way the ARC works for most grant schemes is they have panels. So they have 2 or 3 panels in the sciences, 1 or 2 in the social sciences, and 1, I think, in the humanities. And your application will go to a particular panel. These are all on the ARC website. With all of these funding schemes, most of the information is publicly available. You just have to dig a bit. So one thing with ARC, most applications are unsuccessful. So many of them are less than 10% success rate. And that's really very, very difficult. So it's a major fact of life. The most frustrating process in the career that I've had here has been just not being able to get the grant up that you know in your heart is a great thing to do, but if you can't persuade people, it doesn't happen, you don't get it, you can't do it. And that's a fact of life. It's a frustration and it's a difficulty that you can only manage a certain amount, but you can give yourself a bit more chance. The applications which have got a bit more success rate are typically those where there's another partner. So linkage schemes are a typical one there. But linkage schemes require significant cash from an industry partner, as well as the highest quality research and research training. So going for a linkage grant, you don't go for a linkage grant because the science is a bit pedestrian. You won't get it. To get a linkage grant, you need to get both the science and the industry together. So it can take a long time. For most linkage grants that I've been involved with, about a 3-year time in order to get the industry to your way of thinking, to get them to commit to a linkage grant and getting the serious dollars that you really need to make a decent project. So it takes a long time. So we've talked about fellowships. So there are fellowships throughout the different stages of career. A lot of you will be interested in DECRA, Discovery Early Career Researcher Awards. I forget how many years post PhD. It's a fairly sharp cutoff though, 5, I think, maybe 6, I'm not sure, but check. So that's for the earliest part of the career. These are probably, they're all difficult. DECRAs are a little less difficult than the Future Fellowships and the Laureate Fellowships. Because the competition at the Future Fellowship, this is 10 to 15 years post-PhD, is absolutely fierce. Laureate Fellowship is 15 plus years post-PhD, but it's about national leaders, basically. So very small number. DECRA is always worth considering as an ECR. It is very challenging, but you do have one amongst you. Alex Wu is a DECRA fellow. Well done, Alex, a couple of years ago. So it is possible. And at the risk of overburdening Alex, go and talk to him about it. He will, and it wasn't, from memory, it was the second time round that he got it. So sometimes, not successful, try again. So it is possible. Projects as an EMCR, don't even think about discovery. Be part of a team for sure, but discovery needs a big hitter, someone who's got a nationally leading track record. So discovery sounds great. I can do whatever I want. Yeah, but everyone knows that, and so that becomes really tricky. But get yourself onto a discovery team if possible. If you've got a unique skill set, know who's in your area, who's doing the leading stuff. Doesn't have to be in UQ. Work that through. Nice if it is. Certainly doesn't have to be in QAAFI. Where there's a fit, where there's something that you can bring uniquely, add value to what people who are already leading their fields can do, yeah, go for it. Not easy to find those opportunities. Linkage, yeah, great scheme, does require significant industry connectivity. You're looking for commitments from industry, normally around, well, from 1 or 2 combined in the minimum of 100,000 per annum. Usually you're looking for around 200,000 per annum from industry. But this is not at the expense of the science. That's the important thing about ARC linkage. It's about doing the best science, but with the support of industry. Yep, so there's no dilution of the science criterion. That's the thing that people get wrong about linkage. So you're writing a discovery grant, but with industry support. Then there are the big programs, and by all means, try and be part of these things. You're not going to lead these things, but where possible, be part of it. But that's not a high priority at the EMCR level, I don't think. Often you will be within one of these things. So we have centers of excellence, and we have all 3 of those at the moment, which is fantastic. There's a center of excellence in plant success. There's a transformation research hub in BioClay, and there's a training center in Uniquely Australian Food. So we do have these things going on, and you can learn from how those happen. But these take a long time, a lot of work, huge investment. You're not going to do that yourself. Go and have a look. ARC website's a treasure trove of information. Not a huge amount of detail, but there are project descriptions up there of everything that's funded. Go and look. Now, see, get an idea of what has been funded, because what has been funded last year is not going to be hugely different to what gets funded this year in terms of the type of projects. Yeah, go look. It won't be the same technical area, but you'll get a sense of the sort of level of impact and of statements, challenge statements that people are addressing. But ups and downsides. Great when you get them because you get noticed. The university system still recognizes ARC as prestigious, but yeah, hyper competitive because everyone knows that. So moving on to industry grants, different set of criteria. Big problem, know who you want to work with, the diverse agencies and schemes that are available. This can take a lot of digging around, but ask people. Within QAAFI, we work with pretty much all of the funding agencies in this space. Find someone who's got funding for them. You can normally find that from the website of the grant awarding areas, that they will always put some information up there. You can always ask our research grant admin team, do you know someone who's got funding from this agency? Go talk to them. Find out what it's all about. This should not be a lonely pursuit. This should be a team effort, and we should learn from the experience that we have available to us. So the industry impact is critical. And in some cases, I was tempted to say at the expense of science quality, that the science quality is normally it's sort of taken from red for red, sort of taken, okay, if you're coming from the University of Queensland, the science is going to be fine. We don't have to look at that. We just have to look at whether this is something that will benefit the industry. So industry impact is everything. There will be a science barrier. You can't put things in there which are trivial, but the people that are going to be assessing it will be assessing it from an industry perspective. Whereas the people that are going to be assessing from the ARC will be assessing from an academic perspective. So on the ARC panels, it will be almost entirely, if not entirely, academics. On the industry panels, it will be often entirely, not always, sometimes there are university people, but often be loaded with industry players. And even if there are academics on there, the industry players have the loudest voices because they're representing the investors in this. So the industry impact is the critical thing. Work out what your grant agency is interested in. They've all got strategic plans and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff is out there. So don't go chasing something just because it's out there. You know, you've got to be something that you are the right person to do. You've got the particular background, skill set, and vision to do something. I would say do that first and then go see who is the relevant funding agency and refine on that basis. Don't go looking and say, oh, they're looking for this, maybe I can write a grant in that area. That hardly ever works. Be true to what your skill sets are. So there's the RDCs. Those RDCs are funded, usually funded about 50% by levies on farmers, and then 50% from the federal government. Often the farmers, the producers, are represented on the selection panels, and the benefits to farmer is absolutely key. So this is a sort of source of frustration for myself, trying to get food and nutrition issues in there. I think I make good arguments about how the farmers benefit, but it's often difficult to compete with things which are around productivity and disease management and so on. So you be aware that the farmers are paying the levies. The farmers have a very strong voice in the RDCs. Cooperative research centres, absolutely, as long as UQ is a member. In theory, you can apply to CRCs if your organisation is not a member. In practice, it's pretty much a closed shop to the members. So which CRCs is UQ involved in? How do you know, what are they doing? Is it something that's, go look, find out. Advanced Queensland or whatever. I mean, it's the Queensland government will do something. I think they might rename it now, but whatever, there'll be something at the state level. I'm a little bit cynical here. The way I look at it is that these are projects that a government minister would like to announce, something that's got an iconic Queensland thing. If you can colour it maroon, then go for it. Not really about the quality of the science per se, but about something that's iconic Queensland. Yeah, I may be a bit cynical there, but it is it's absolutely the Queensland focus rather than the Australian focus. If you don't know about the Innovation Connection Scheme, this is go look. This is a really good scheme, relatively small, but essentially non-competitive. So as long as so industry can't be too big, it's meant to support growing industries. But basically, for $1 that the industry party puts in, the federal government put in another $1. You'll get 80% of that to do research. 20% goes to overheads to UQ. But you'll get 80% of that money to do research, and it's a grant. It's a grant that's actually put in by your industry partner, and the quality of science is not an issue. It is about the impact that you can make. So yeah, you don't get to do very long-term stuff on this. These are one-year grants, but you can renew for another year if you can get the industry funding. The important point is that, yeah, it's almost automatic. If you can get the industry funding and the industry is compliant with the scheme. So if you haven't heard of that one, go look. Always, and I think Pat will say exactly the same thing, always benefits from groundwork. You've really got to be known in the sector. So if it's ARC, be known in the academic sector. If it's an industry, be known in that industry. if a grant comes in from someone who's just a complete unknown, even if we got UQ or QAAFI behind it, it doesn't stand much chance unless you've got a senior co-investigator with you, and that can be the case, of course. So, but if you're wanting to create your own careers, then getting that groundwork is important. And of course, and this is the challenge, right? So you've got to decide which area you're going to do that groundwork in. And this is where you talk to your mentors and panels and so on. You just have to work that out as individuals, I guess. What's the fertile field that I can try and sow into? So I'm just summarizing a bit now, I guess, the writing the grant bit. So take the time, make sure you involve as many people as possible. Get the budget right, talk to the research grant admin team in QAAFI, they're there to help you. They want you to succeed in these things. So, use the network that's available. If possible, sometimes these things are online applications, you can't put diagrams in. I always start here though. Even if I can't put a diagram in the grant application, I put the diagram down. Can I really put that project down in a simple diagram? Can I get the elevator pitch, the 3MT type thing? What's your slide? What's the thing that really captures it? And then write around that, because you need to have a simple, clear concept, because often people who are reading these things, certainly ARC, assessors will have maybe 100 grants to assess. They're not going to spend several hours trying to understand your grant. They're going to spend several minutes. You've got to hit them between the eyes straight away. Think about that. You've got to get that first page in ARC is absolutely critical. If you don't get the first page, then you're not going to get past it. The rest is critical as well, but the first page is the key. And having some sort of plan on the first page that people say, "Oh, I get it. That's what they're doing." Then they're in the groove and they understand. But if it's all very difficult to understand, whoa, no, how are you going to do that? Same thing in words. What's the pressing need for the work? Why must it be done? Number one. And number two, why are you or the team the best people to do it? That's what grants are about. And it's about selling the concept of what you're trying to do and showing that you're the right people. In essence, that's what it is. And then you've got a lot of detail around that. So that's what takes some crafting and really understanding that. So sometimes the pressing need for the work, you try and put that in academic terms, solving a big societal commercial issue. But sometimes it's an industry specific thing. This industry needs this now and we can provide it. That's what you've got to try and really spend some time working on. Yeah, know who you're writing to. So do your research, ask people like me and Pat, who are the sort of people who are going to be looking at this, but always look at the fine print of the selection criteria. Just know it inside out. For some schemes, they'll even tell you what the fraction of the scores are going to be, 20% on this, 15% on that. Make sure your grant reflects that. If it's 20% on something, spend a fifth of the pages available on that selection criteria. Be overt about it. Talk to the selection criteria directly. Don't beat about the bush. If the selection criteria are out there, write exactly to them. Don't write the grant you want to write the grant they want to read. Yeah, pretty simple stuff, I guess. Okay, that's it from introductory stuff. Do you want me to take some questions now, Amol, or do you want to go on to Pat?
Yeah, really interesting insight, Mike. Really detailed categorization of different grants under ARC, which is really going to be helpful for us as a EMCR, because usually we see the bigger grant and we try to approach it, but we got to be realistic in that approach, which grants we can and we cannot apply to, and we get our effort into real success. So yeah, really wonderful insight. Thank you so much for that. So we'll move to Patrick now, and then we'll get to the final question answer session after Patrick's talk. You ready to get going, Patrick?
Yep.
Thank you.
So I will follow on from Mike, and I want to have a slightly different emphasis. So I totally support everything that Mike has said. I think he's given some wonderful insight there, and I think I assume this is all recorded, so I think people will have the opportunity to go back and look, because there was a lot of stuff there that people need to really think about. So I'm very positive about what Mike has said. I want to just raise very quickly the NH and MRC. I know that this will not apply to many people, but don't say that it's totally irrelevant. Particularly, they have a scheme which is designed for early and mid-career researchers. It will have to fit into the areas. So that's the One Health, antimicrobial resistance, zoonotic diseases. So it's not for all of QAAFI, but it's there and it's available. There's a perception, I don't know that it's true, but there's a perception that it's less competitive than ARC. So I don't know that that's true. Like many of the things that Mike emphasised, it's really a collaborative approach. You really need to have a project or an area that builds on the vet school, the SAFs, the tropical and public health people. But it is relevant, and I certainly have been involved in attempts to get funding, none successful yet, but it is relevant. I want to focus on the industry schemes. And my first rule that I tell the young people in my lab, never, ever use the word grant. The industry does not like that word. It's academic, it's blue sky, it implies money that's given away freely for nothing in return. So I never, ever use the word grant. As Mike said, it's all for the industry schemes, it's all about impact, adoption. That's what the industry wants. The schemes I'm going to talk about are actually two. One is those that fall under the RDC, the Rural Research and Development Corporations. And the classic example for me, so I'll pick my examples, is agri-futures and chicken meat. A key characteristic about this sort of funding, it is Canberra focused. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. There are another much larger group of industry bodies. For me, that's Australian Pork Limited, Australian Eggs. They're not under the RDC. They are not Canberra focused to the same degree, and that makes a big difference. Okay, as Mike said, these schemes are levies, and you've got to understand that. So for instance, for the pigs, every time a pig is killed, a farmer gives up a bit of his profit. His profit is taken off him, and it goes into a central fund. For the meat chickens, it's every time a chick is hatched, the processing company, be it an Ingham's or a Bayarda or whoever owns the hatchery, loses a bit of their profit. It's gone. It's taken off them, okay? Each of those dollars that comes from those levies is matched by a taxpayer dollar. And when the people sit down to spend that money, the people who sit down in these industry schemes are industry people and the government representative, if it's a Canberra-focused scheme. So they're going to drive industry relevance and impact and that Canberra focus where relevant. So that's where the chicken meat type thing, they are under that Canberra focus. So they will spend all of their levy on research. That's all they can do. Okay? So the levy for the RDCs totally goes to research. For the other bodies, Australian Pork and Australian Eggs, they can decide where to spend their levy. And many of them will actually put it into promotion. They will get a quicker return. I don't know whether you're all familiar with this. There's an advertising campaign, more pork on your fork. Okay? They can take the levy and spend it on TV ads, and they will sell more pork quickly. Whereas if they take their levy and put it into research, it's a slow burn. It will benefit, but it takes years to get that benefit back. So in those industries, there's great pressure on that levy to be spent on the quick return. And that's a real issue for those funding bodies. They have less of a Canberra focus, however. Okay, I'm going to talk about how you get established and how you can attract industry funding. And it's all about, as Mike said, you need a profile, you need a network. The industries will not fund somebody they've never seen or never heard of. They just will not do it. You have to get these sorts of profiles. Get to industry-linked meetings. I tell the young people in my lab, if you're going to an industry meeting, don't just go to the one that you're interested in. If you're a disease person, go to them all. You've actually got to know your industry. You've got to know about nutrition, disease, welfare, reproduction. Get the whole picture. If you're a presenter, and that's a key thing to be doing, don't just show up for your session or your talk and then walk away. You've got to be there and be there all day and make yourself visible. You're making the point that you're there for the industry, to help the industry. You're not there just to give your talk, get your dollars and go. Never create that impression. Make it clear that you're actually interested in the industry. Get to know them. Get to know who are the key people in the industry. Use your academic mentors to make those introductions. The industry's got to think of you immediately they have a problem. The avocado industry will think of Liz Dan. You've got to get to the stage where they think of you as the solution to their problem. I also highly stress the need to get into the professional societies. You need to join them. Attend those meetings. Now, I know it's difficult attending meetings with the current COVID scenario, but they're actually cheaper to get to these. The opportunities, there are more of them now. You can get to lots more meetings electronically than we ever were able to send people on planes and trains and all other means of transport. So get to those meetings. Particularly in industries I work with, the industry figures are actually in those societies. So they're seeing you there as well as at the industry meetings. Again, you're building your network. Attend all the sessions, even if it's about a different part of the science that you're not interested. Sit there and learn and show that you're interested. Get to know the leaders. They're going to be key figures for you long into your future. So they're the things you've got to do to build your network. Now, developing your proposal. For the industry ones, you have got to talk to the industry figures. Be prepared for brutal feedback. Industry people are busy. They're looking for good ideas, but it's got to be ideas that they think are good. So be prepared. You'll sometimes get very brutal feedback. Accept it. You've got to be willing to, as Mike has said, you've got to be writing an application that the funding body wants, not what you want. So you've got to talk to industry and you've got to be prepared to modify. The really good thing that I think stands out from industry versus ARC, you count. The industry is going to trust you and your network. Okay, that's what's critical. For instance, the industries I work with, pigs, broilers, layers, they still think I work for QAAFI. They haven't got the foggiest idea that I'm actually at the University of Queensland. They couldn't care less where I am. And that's the thing that you've got to build. If you're interested in industry grants, you've got to be the person they know. It's not the University of Queensland they know. It's not QAAFI they know. They know you. That's what you've got to chase. As Mike stressed, you've got to look at industry research priorities and their 5-year research plans. They're all there. They're up on the websites. They all have them. That's what they're going to make their decisions on. Look at those carefully. Don't come with your idea and try and force it into theirs. Look at what their priorities are and develop your ideas around industry priorities. Make it clear that your proposal is one that industry figures have identified as a key critical issue. You don't have to convince them because you're coming with their important idea and offering a solution. Do that via consultation. Quote the industry research priorities back in your application. Show them that you actually know what they want done. Okay, in terms of just writing, for particularly the industry schemes, they've got to be realistic, practical outcomes and deliveries. They want something after 3 years. They want it practical. The biggest problem is over-promising. People feel that to get a project fund, they've got to promise, 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 and up with the stars. But then you've got to deliver. And you're going to regret that for the life of that project, trying to deliver too much. So be realistic. Do not overpromise. Make your milestones very informative, but don't lock yourself into hard numbers. Industries will have milestones at least every 6 months, if not every 3 months. So you need them, but don't make them like, I've used the example here, test 1,200 pigs by novel ELISA. Don't put numbers in. As Mike said, some of these funding bodies are looking for ways to cut you off. So if you say you're going to test 1,200 sera and you only test 200 for reasons beyond your control, you're opening yourself up to have the project closed. So I use words like testing of field sera. As much as possible, I avoid locking myself in to very specific milestones. Budget's really important. Mike said you have to be realistic, and you do. The really positive thing about industry, you ask for $1, and if you convince them, they'll give you $1. This concept where the ARC says, yeah, we'll give you 30 cents, to me, it's such an alien world. The industries will give you the $1, but be realistic. You know, make sure your budget reflects what the university wants you to get in, but what you also need to do your work. Another key message, I actually think you need to plan to deliver your project with yourself, with postdocs, or with professional technical staff. These are industry milestones. They have to be delivered on time, each time. There's no excuses. You've got the milestone, deliver it. I do plan to use PhD students, but they're the cream. They bring in this wonderful science, all the novelty, all the extra stuff, but they're slow. They've got to build to that excellence. Forcing students to deliver tight milestones every 6 months, here it is, deliver it, deliver it, deliver it. That's not good for you, and it's not good for the students. That's the sort of pressure, I'm sorry, but that's the sort of pressure you put on postdocs, yourself, and the professional technical staff. Hey, we've got this milestone, deliver it. I don't think you should be doing that to PhD students. They need to grow. They need to find their feet. They need to develop the new areas. They'll deliver the cream, the really novel science for you, but don't make them deliver milestones, in my view. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
That is wonderful insight, Patrick. Really, really great and inspirational as well, I guess. But I see there are two different perspectives that I've seen, which hit me quite strongly when Mike's approach was basically try and build a project around your expertise and then go to the industry. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. And what you were suggesting is look at the industry, what it wants, your expertise, and then build a project around it. Now, do you want to talk about it? Am I getting it wrong, or are these two different ways that we can
I don't think they're that different, actually, Amol. I think the point I was making was make sure that you're the right person and it is the right project. So that needs that combination. I guess what I was warning against was looking at the industry criteria and saying, oh, I could probably write a project in that area. It's a little bit outside what I normally do. And that's not worth it. So that was what I was sort of saying, know what your area is. If you feel like you want to adapt it over a period of 2, 3, 4 years, then that's how long it takes, so that you would have that time to establish the networks and to become known. So that's a difficult thing to do. So I just think get those things in balance. Get your skill base, what you can do, and who you can work with, against the industry in industry case, the industry criteria. Just don't force either of them. If you're forcing them, it's generally pretty obvious.
And I strongly agree, Mike. I think you and I are in agreement. I think we use slightly different words, but yeah, you've got to have the relevant expertise. But with the industry ones, you've got to be able to show that you're relevant to their problems. So yeah, I think we're in total agreement. Can I suggest another strategy that I should have mentioned? I call it the fading star strategy. So the real problem for young people is how to get in to the system. So routinely in our lab, and we've done it over the generations, someone like me gets the initial project, okay, and gets them going. But you have the new emerging star on the team. And as the project moves through its 3 years, the fading star drops away. The original project leader disappears into the background. And the new emerging person gives all the industry reports, presents at the professional meetings. So you won't initially be the project leader, but over the period of the project, the industry thinks, oh, okay, we've got this new person. That old person's buggered off and now we've got the new person. So the fading star strategy is one way of building yourself in to that project leadership, to that industry recognition that you need for those industry schemes.
Yeah. So I think Ali wants to talk to you guys. So I'll just allow him to speak. Ali, you can speak now.
Yep. Hi, Pat. Thanks, Pat and Mike. Really wonderful session. A lot of new information, useful tips. So that was exactly my question, which Pat has just answered about how we sneak into the industry to get to let people know that we are working here and then we can solve their problems and then we can get some funding.
Yeah, you have to use you have to work it's best in a group, and that's the sort of approach that we've used over the years in our setting, where there is a senior person, but they edge you in, bring you in, and expose you and introduce you to this person, introduce you to that person, make sure that you speak at this conference, bring your profile up. So that's where you need your mentors to bring you along, and for those mentors then to quietly fade away, which is the sort of role that I'm best at these days, fading away into the distance.
Thank you.
Does that make sense, Ali?
Yeah.
Perfect. So Patrick, you mentioned that to not use word grant. So when you're interacting with the industry person, how do you approach it?
I talk about a research proposal, a new idea. I never, ever use the word grant. You've got to understand, it's not true, but many industry people regard academics as eggheads. You know, they're these people that sit in this tower out at St. Lucia and they got all this wonderful technology and, you know, there's perceptions. And that word grant is part of those perceptions. So I just avoid it. I just never use it. I'll talk about proposals, projects, anything except the word grant.
Yeah, similar sort of thing. I mean, I would be talking to commercial partners and first of all, finding out whether there's a researchable problem, and often there isn't. And one of the best ways of getting industry support is to be free with your advice. You know, if there isn't a research program there, don't go looking for it. Just say, well, no, I think, you know, you don't really need that. That's just about, you know, we know that already, and this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
So don't be cute about holding on to things that are actually common knowledge, because they'll thank you for it, and you'll be part of the relationship building. Then when there is a researchable question that's there, you then talk about, first of all, you find out what that question is, and then you talk about what the solutions could be. Once you've agreed that, you start saying, okay, how can we make it happen? And this is where the grant schemes are useful, because the way you put it is that these are leveraging the industry money. You know, so if the industry did it themselves and they paid for it all themselves, it would cost this much. But if we were successful in applying for this grant, and that's in that context, they're very happy with it, because now it's a grant to a problem that they are owning. Okay, so get the problem definition first, get the challenge statement or whatever you have, whatever it is, the researchable question. Work that out between you and get a common agreement that, yeah, we want to do this. Then you start talking about how we're going to do it. What are the mechanisms? And that's where I think pretty much all the linkage projects I've led have been down that road. You know, we've got industry interested in doing the project. Then they realize what wonderful leverage they can get through a linkage project at the expense of it taking some time. You know, that it is something that there will be many months delay. If you've got the option to be able to give them a few freebies at the beginning to keep them sweet, that's also good. You know, there's all sorts of, you know, it should not be an arm's length relationship. It should be a sort of a mutually dependent relationship. You should need them as much as they need you. Preferably they need you more, but sometimes it's about. But if you need them more than they need you, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another question. Maybe particularly focusing on ARC's grant selection criteria and then the process that happens. So basically, there are two different levels. So first, we have a general assessor who looks at your grant, and then it goes to the expert assessor. So when we look at those two different steps and we try to write the grant, usually there are two different ways that people can address it, by putting so much of technical information within the grant writing sections and make it more technical or scientific. And there is another way where we can simply have more generalistic approach so that it is available to most of the population, easy to understand. So looking at these two steps, which is a combination, how do you address your grant writing to focus on both the assessors, not just one?
Okay, no, that's an easy one. You do both. Your journalistic style is for the first 2 or 3 pages, but you have to put some technical grunt in there somewhere. I normally hide it on pages 4 or 5 or 6. It's just enough depth of the science that you can convince an expert that you know what you're talking about. That's pretty much all you need. If an expert's looking at it, they'll want to understand that you've got the credentials and that you've got the depth to take on the project. But that's not the first thing they look for. So this should be hidden on page 5 or 6 of the grant. Not hidden, but detailed. But just allocate a fraction of the total grant to that.
Yeah.
All of it is really about the selling of the concept at a level that is to the general scientist.
So can I jump in about industry schemes? So it's a different universe.
Yeah.
So the typical industry schemes are a 2-stage proposal, exactly as Mike and Amal have talked about. But at the first stage, it's a 2-page proposal, just 2 pages. Okay. Now that has lots of advantages. You know, it doesn't take you think it doesn't take a lot of time to write 2 pages. However, the crunch is in 2 pages, you've got to sell your project, your ideas, your practical outcomes. It's actually very difficult to do that, but at least it's only a 2-pager. So in the typical industry funding bodies, there'll be about a 90% cull at 2-page. It'll vary, 90, 70, 50. And then when you get to the next stage, that's when you've got the full document and you need all of the technical details. At that 2-pager level, what you've got to focus on, as Mike has, and perhaps Amal, you've talked about journalistic, you need to sell the vision and the practical outcomes. The technical details are not really critical at that stage. So it's a very different approach. The other thing to remember is in the industry ones, particularly those that are outside the RDC, it's almost totally industry. They won't have government bureaucrats. They'll rarely have university academics. These are people who are growing the pigs. You've got to talk to a pig farmer or a chicken farmer. You know, that's your audience that you've got to talk to in those applications.
Sure. Yes, absolutely important to remember while writing grant. These points are very, very critical. There is another step in ARC, which is rejoin us. So where we get the feedback and then we understand if we can improve it, how to address certain questions that the committee has raised or the assessors has raised about the project. What is your experience with these rejoiners, and also with industry grants? Is it like you can get as many rejoiners as you can based on your personal relationship, or there's simply like a few steps that happens? So maybe whoever want to start with that.
Should I start with the ARC, because that's a defined process? So the ARC process, your grant goes in, it's allocated to a panel. So this is where the codes that you put at the beginning of an ARC grant, and what are the fields of research and the socioeconomic objectives, particularly the field of research though, that will determine which panel it goes to. So I've played that game once in the past. Sometimes I wanted to go to an engineering panel, sometimes I wanted to go to a biology panel. I just put different field of research and I can essentially select which panel it goes to. It doesn't, you know, that's just a guesswork. Once it gets to the panel, then someone will have carriage of that. They will then have selected, or the ARC will help them select a number of reviewers. The really important point though is that the reviews that you see and that you have a rejoinder to are not written by the person that will actually speak to your proposal at the meeting. So the guy that's going to, the person who's going to do that at the meeting, they will have received these reviewer reports and they go back out to the applicants. And then the person who's going to represent the project at the meeting sees both all the reviews that went out and all the rejoinders, and that person then makes a synthesis of that. So what you do not see is the opinion of the person that's actually going to speak to it at the meeting. So that's, in my view, that's probably why there's a pretty limited correlation between how enthusiastic the reviewers are and the chance of getting the grant. Having said that, in doing the rejoinder, focus on just addressing any of the sticking points that they raise, and the research office will tell you this. I mean, it's a very well established thing. Don't reiterate what's already in the grant. Just address very succinctly, just like you're doing a good journal reviewer response. You don't not reselling it. You're just addressing the issues that arise and showing that they're not serious. But the point is, and it is a real frustration in the ARC system, that the only reviews you see, you don't see the review that really matters, which is from the person that's representing that project at the panel and into the discussion. So that person is the bottleneck through which all the information flows. So the other panel members will not see necessarily the reviews and the rejoinder from all other projects, because they're going to have to get through 500 or 600 proposals in 2 or 3 days.
Okay. Patrick, do you want to add?
Yeah, just very quickly from an industry, the industry schemes, there isn't really a rejoinder system. So what will happen in a typical system is you'll just get told your proposal wasn't accepted. I have been on the funding bodies. The tendency is not to give too much information back to failed applicants, because that just opens up complaints. And also, literally in most of the industry funding bodies, they will not give you details about why you didn't get past the PRP. But if you do get past the PRP and are told, look, at the FRP, we want more focus on 3-legged chickens, you better focus on 3-legged chickens. You know, what if the feedback, you know, to move you to FRP says something, In an industry scheme, you've got to have a good reason not to follow it. So that feedback is critical as you move from PRP to FRP. The other thing you should never do in the industry schemes is, once you get past PRP, think, great, I'll double the budget now. I forgot to include the technician, the industry, the university. If you increase your budget by $1, you're out the door. You said you would deliver at the PRP level, you've got to stay there.
Yep, okay. So I think there's one question from Alex Wu. What are PRP and FRP?
Oh, preliminary research proposal, full research proposal. So it's a two-stage process. My apologies. Yeah. So preliminary and full. It is a really effective scheme because it should allow the focus to come, onto that FRP if you get to that stage.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think that's pretty clear. The next step within the ARC grant is advisory committee meeting. So once basically your proposal is passed through all the assessors, and then it goes to the advisory committee, what exactly role does it play into your grant success?
Is that's the funding committee, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so sure, that's where the decisions are made. So that's what I've been talking about. So that's where there'll be one of the panel members will be responsible for your grant, and it may or may not be someone who's in the direct area that the grant is in, but their role is to represent that grant at that meeting, and then. I've never been in an ARC meeting. I've been in similar ones, similar intent ones overseas. Then if it's the same as that, then each grant gets introduced, and a general thing, is this fundable? Is it not fundable? If it's not fundable, it goes, and no one challenges it. There should be someone else who's looking at it. Sometimes there's two people looking at it, but not often. And then you get to things which you then start getting some numbers. So that they'll start putting some metrics on it. Just a calibrated scale, and that's the way in which they will typically will try and rank. Either every individual one will get ranked individually, or will go into bands. And then the schemes I'm familiar with, they start at the top with the money and they start pouring it in, and then as it fills up, you then say, well, okay, if we funded all of them, this is where we fund down to in terms of. And then the decisions get made as to, okay, how much further down the list do you want to go funding, and therefore how much do you want to take away from some of the other applications. You will see in some ARC schemes they will fund full, they will do full funding, and I have seen that from time to time. The standard thing, though, at least for discovery and linkage, is to fund more grants at a less than 100%. So yeah, that's what and it's called advisory committee because they can't actually make the decisions. The decisions are formally made by the minister. Okay, so that's why it's an advice. So it's an advice to the minister, right. And so there are just none in the areas that we work in, I don't think, but there have been some notorious cases in the past where the minister has decided to intervene, and it's seen then as political interference, and that becomes a whole cause célèbre in its own right. So in general, that they are the decision-making meetings, but the ARC advises the minister on which grants to fund and how much to fund them to. From what I understand, then apart from the few notorious exceptions, then that's what happens.
Yep. Just quickly on that, Patrick, is there anything like that happens within the industry grant, or it's a case-by-case different process?
No, certainly, because remember, in all of the industry schemes I was talking about, there's 50% taxpayer money. So yeah, it's the same issue. The minister's got to approve it. I'm not aware of any political situations that have occurred in those funding bodies, but yeah, there's 50% taxpayer money there. So the minister will have that final approval.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're running short of time now, but it's really, really wonderful insight that we've got from your huge experience, I said. And thank you so much for finding time from your busy schedule, because I understand you too are swamped with lots of online meetings, particularly in this COVID era, and also looking after your lab and students and postdocs. But really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and looking forward to see EMCRs inspired from this seminar and do good work for QAAFI and UQ. Let's see how it goes. Thank you so much for that.
Thanks,
Best wishes to everyone.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck.
Thank you.
See ya.
See ya. And thank you so much, all the participants.